school year, sad. But we're going to be looking at what is a mineral tonight, talking about the characteristics that make something a mineral. And then next week we'll talk about how to identify them and then how they combine together to form rocks. So today though we'll just define what a mineral is and how does an object get classified as a mineral. So let's start with a definition of what a mineral is. It's a naturally occurring inorganic solid with a definite chemical composition and an orderly arrangement of atoms. And so we're going to go over what all of those terms mean. So I recognize this is like, so we're going to go over what all these terms mean, but this is the textbook definition of a mineral. So we're going to break this down into 5 specific things that a mineral has to have in order to be considered a mineral. So you can think of this almost as a checklist, and an object has to meet all 5 of these things in order to be considered a mineral. So each mineral must fit 5 characteristics, and you don't need to write these all down now. We're going to go through each one individually, so you can kind of list them in your notes as we go through them. So each mineral must fit 5 characteristics. It has to have a definite chemical composition. This means that it always contains the same thing. It has to be inorganic, can be made without living things. Naturally occurring, not made by people. Have a crystal structure, meaning the molecules that make up the mineral are arranged in some pattern. And it has to be a solid. It's a solid. All right. If it does not fit any one of these characteristics, it's not a mineral. So this is an all or nothing kind of thing. Right? And you can use the acronym DINKS to help remember the 5 characteristics. So let's go through what each one is individually. So our first characteristic of a mineral is its definite chemical composition. Right? Composition means to be made of. Composition means what you're made of, and so a definite meaning fixed, meaning defined. So a mineral always contains certain elements in definite proportion. So it always contains the exact same thing in the exact same kind of ratios to each other. Right? So some minerals are pure elements. Right? So gold or silver. Right? If you were to break that down, all you'll get is tinier and tinier and tinier pieces of gold. Most minerals, though, are compounds. And in 8th grade, you'll go into a lot more about elements and compounds. For us, though, we're really concerned that the mineral is always made of the same basic building block. So quartz or silica has 2 types of atoms in it, but those are locked together to form a quartz molecule. And so all quartz everywhere in the world, no matter where you were to go, is going to be made up of these same ratios of things. So a mineral has a definite chemical composition. It's always the same thing, no matter where you find it. Next up, it has to be inorganic, right? Organic meaning to come from not just organic food where you grow it without artificial pesticides, but for science, organic meaning to come from a living thing. So a mineral has to be able to be formed without using living things or the remains of living things. So an example of a mineral would be salt, right? If you let seawater evaporate, you get salt, right? That's inorganic, so that could be considered a mineral. Coal, on the other hand, that you mine out of the ground, is the remains of plants that lived millions of years ago, right? Even though it's not a living thing today, it's made using the remains of living things, and that's the only way you can make coal, so coal cannot be considered a mineral. Third, it has to be naturally occurring. This is pretty straightforward. If it's made by people, it's not a mineral. And we'll talk later on about the 2 ways that minerals can form, and so don't worry too much about these right now. But they're formed by processes that occur in the natural world. So cooling magma, if a mineral is dissolved in water and that water evaporates, like the salt we just talked about, that can also form a mineral. Fourth, it has to have our mineral has to have a crystal structure. All right. So when we think of crystal, we think of expensive and pretty and nice. Doesn't necessarily have to be that in a mineral. All right. So crystal structure just means that if you were to zoom in on the super microscopic level, the particles that make up this mineral are lined up in a microscopic pattern that repeats over and over and over. Sometimes a mineral that is able to form kind of in space, you'll get these really nice flat edges on the mineral itself, like these quartz crystals here. But that doesn't mean that if you don't see these big ones, that a mineral doesn't have a crystal structure. All right, this is really hard to test in the labs that we'll do. So in general, like on a quiz or a test, if I ask you to determine if something is a mineral or not, unless I talk about the crystal structure, you can assume that it has one. All right. Some examples of crystal structures, right? You've got cubes, what are called tetragons, which are just long rectangles, orthorhombic, monoclinic. You don't need to memorize these, you don't need to know them. But these are just examples of different crystal shapes that the molecules of our mineral can arrange themselves in. And these patterns repeat over and over and over and over. And our last one is a solid, right? It has a definite shape and volume. It's not a liquid, it's not a gas. So it's packed together tightly and it cannot move. And then our acronym, one more time to remember, was DINCS, definite chemical composition, inorganic, naturally occurring crystal structure, and solid. So to review, this is kind of the checklist of what makes something a mineral. If it doesn't have all 5 of these characteristics, it is not considered to be a mineral. All right, make sure you have 3 questions at the bottom. Next week we will look at mineral formation, and we will simulate making some minerals in class, and then we'll look at how to identify what kind of a mineral is what. Have a great weekend and a great Easter.